Siri Hustvet posmatra roman kao laboratoriju u kojoj se reflektuju različite perspektive i polje interesovanja, kao prostor u koji može da stane sve, od književne fikcije do naučnog metoda. Tako, kroz prelamanje literature i neuronauke, umetnosti i psihijatrije, nastaju njeni najpoznatiji romani Sve što sam voleo, Leto bez muškaraca, Svet u plamenu, naslovi koji joj donose književni renome u Americi, ali i međunarodnu reputaciju. Siri Hustvet rođena je 1955. u Northfieldu u američkoj državi Minnesota u porodici norveškog porekla, a studije književnosti završila je na Columbia univerzitetu u Njujorku. Još kao mlada stavlja pred sebe izazov da se afirmiše u svim žanrovima. Najpre objavljuje zbirku pesama, zatim romane, te studije o savremenoj umetnosti, stručne radove iz oblasti neuronauke, kao i knjige eseja. Mnogi kritičari vole da je posmatraju upravo kroz prizmu naslova koje je objavila na polju nefikcije. U naslovu Žena koja drhti ili Istorija mojih nerava, Siri Hustvet kreće od sopstvenog iskustva. Od priče o nekontrolisanim trzajima svoga tela koje prate nepodnošljivi napadi migrene, da bi promenila poziciju naratora i od pacijenta postala lekar, kako bi analizirala složene oblike i odnose psihe i tela. Zahvaljujući erudiciji i širokom obrazovanju, Siri Hustvet čest je gost na evropskim univerzitetima i institutima. U Beču je rado pozivaju da drži predavanje o Freudu, u Kopenhagenu o Kierkegaardu, u muzeju Prado o Goji, u Metropolitan muzeju o savremenim vizuelnim umetnicima, dok u Njujorku i Brooklynu, gde živi, vodi različite radionice pri psihijatrijskim ustanovama.
So Siri, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Your first vocation and formation is literature, but you deal also with psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, art. So do you think that literature is a kind of multidisciplinary field?
I am committed to the novel as, I think, one of the great and most flexible forms of all writing. So that inside even a novel, I think there's room for all kinds of exploration of ideas. My interests are indeed broad, and I continue to try to pursue both fiction and nonfiction.
What is the most important thing you thought from neuroscience that was useful for your literature?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think what's really interesting, however, is that there is still no consensus about what the human mind is. We know a lot about the brain, but we still don't know what the relationship between the brain itself with its neurons and, synaptic connections, the different areas of the brain, how this is connected to what we think of as consciousness and the mind. It's not solved.
What is the relationship between mind and body?
Well, this is it.
Our character, is it something that takes part of our body or not?
Yes. I'm very much a person who takes the position that we are embodied creatures, that the mind-brain is an embodied business, and that isolating the brain from the rest of the body, even though, of course, one has to focus on that, can be a mistake because it's obviously connected to the entire nervous system, to everything else that goes on in us. And the old distinction between the mind and the body, that of course goes way back to the Greeks, is, I think, a rather dangerous idea. And there's a feminist aspect to this as well, because the body has long been associated with women and the mind with men. And so the position that we're all body subjects or body beings is, I think, a way to overcome some of these long-standing prejudices about men and women, but also about the idea that the intellect is somehow a floating quality that is beyond the body. I don't believe that.
Yeah, you already said you write both books of fiction and non-fiction, and in your books of non-fiction, you take as the starting point your own experience, and that's the way you wrote. That was the starting point for your book, A Shaking Woman,
Yes.
on the history of my nerves.
Yes.
So that shaking woman, who is
Yes.
she?
Who is she? Well, I think I wrote the book to find out in some way. It was a book in which I was able to play two parts at the same time. In other words, I was both doctor and patient. But it was a journey. The book was a journey, and it ends with that statement, I am the shaking woman. And I wasn't sure that that's where I was going to end up. It really was a work of circling a problem from many different points of view: philosophical, psychiatric, psychoanalytic, neuroscientific. I just kept looking at this symptom and exploring various possibilities. In one version of the story, the burnt piece of donut box might stand for hunger. I think Mark was always starved for something. But what? He wanted me to believe him, admire him. He wanted it badly, for at least as long as he looked into my eyes. Maybe that need was the one thing that was whole and true in him, and it made him radiant. It didn't matter that he felt little or nothing for me, or that he had to pretend to get my admiration. What mattered was that he felt my belief. But the pleasure he took in pleasing others never lasted. Insatiable, he gorged on crackers and donuts, stolen things and money, on pharmaceuticals, and on the chase itself.
What I loved is my favorite book of
That's
yours.
nice. Well, thank you.
And I like also very much the title, because it's very ambivalent.
Yes.
What I loved
Yeah.
could refer to the people we loved
Yes.
or to ourselves.
There actually is a moment in the novel when one of the characters, Violet, says, I don't know what it was that I loved. So it's picking up on that. But yeah, and also that you have the first person in the title itself. So the narrator is Leo, and it is a book that is a journey through his loves. And his loves include art. He's an art historian. So the what encompasses, I think, both the human beings, the objects, and the ghosts that haunt Leo throughout
Yes,
the
there
book.
are a lot of ghosts.
There are a lot of ghosts.
This is a book about love, but for me, that's a book also about loss.
Yes.
And there are two very difficult psychological problems. The first one is the death of the boy who is 11 years old.
Yes.
So how did you decide to write about a kind of so unhuman loss?
Well, you know, this is, where do books come from? Where do they come
Yes.
from? It's really difficult to say. You know, I haven't, fortunately, had a child who died, and that's a good thing. At the same time, I think every parent, and I am a parent, fantasizes about what it would mean to lose the child. It is a kind of horrible loss. And so I guess in that book, I went into that terrible place and explored it.
There is also the other loss. There is the other boy.
Yes.
Who is alive.
Yes.
But he's lost for his parents because
Yes.
he's a person without any affection, without empathy.
Yeah, he's a
How did you come up to
unconnected
make him?
person. Well,
Yes.
this is part of, I have to say, part of my psychiatric reading. The reason why some people become psychopaths or antisocial people is not really known. But in the book, I was quite careful to create a plausible story, you know, a plausible psychiatric case history.
Yes, but
yes.
so you wrote about the issues, about the problems, which are very difficult to be analyzed even by psychologists.
Yes, yes,
So,
yes,
do you realize?
exactly. Yes, yes.
So-
And you know,
So
I
do you
did a
think
huge amount of reading about this, and I think maybe one of the most terrible and sad conditions in the world is this: to be unconnected to other people, to have no empathy. And when you don't have empathy, you don't have much guilt either. So it's a tragic book, although at the
It's
very
very
end,
tragic, yes.
at the very end, you know, Leo remains capable of attachment and love. I mean, that's his gift. So tragic as it is, I don't think of it as a book without, you know, any hope.
It ends with the question, what I loved. And do you think that the perception of what we loved changed by the time passing? That the present time could change our perception of the past?
Oh, yes. In fact, the nature of memory seems to be quite clear at this point, that there is no original memory. So what we remember is the last time we retrieved a particular memory. This means that unconsciously we are continually editing our past. Now, Freud had an idea very similar to the one in contemporary neuroscience, which is called reconsolidation, which means every time you take out a memory, you reconsolidate it. So
Or recreate it,
it's
you mean?
recreated, re-edited, if you will. And we are not reliable rememberers.
Not at all.
Not at all, no. And in fact, every family knows this, because if you sit at a table with friends and family and discuss exactly the same event, you understand very quickly that every person at that table remembers it differently. Or others have forgotten entirely what happened.
Yeah, what I loved is written in the first person. Your narrator is a man.
Mm-hmm.
So, was it difficult to you to get into a man's mind?
No. You know, we all have men and women inside us. We were all born to a father and a mother. And we all live with men and women. And I do think those voices are different. They're culturally different. Writing as a man was fun. And it was fun because I think men always occupy a more central and more universal position in the culture. So that as soon as you write as a woman, you necessarily push yourself to the side. Only a couple of years ago, at a discussion group on sex and the brain, I was shocked when a colleague of Boris's assured me that in the animal kingdom, or rather in the female side of the animal kingdom, in other words, in the whole animal queendom, only human women experience orgasm. We two-leggers could do it, but no other animals. In males, of course, prowess went all the way down the mammalian ladder. Male arousal has deep biological roots. In women, it's just a fluke, an accident. From a purely physiological point of view, this struck me as absurd. My primate sisters, who share so much of my equipment upstairs and downstairs, had no fun during sex? What did that mean? Among our four-legged cousins, only the males experienced joy? While I argued my point, Boris glowered at me from across the table. I had been admitted as a special guest. A couple of books and several papers later, I discovered that the smug six were dead wrong, which meant, of course, that I was dead right.
In the summer, without men, you make a kind of joke, I think.
Yes, it is.
What does the modern neuroscience say about those differences between the brain of men and women?
Now, scientists are not a block. They believe and study different things. And among those studying sex difference, there are those who have come down very hard on the idea that male and female brains are somehow extremely different. I think the evidence for this is pretty poor. There are definitely a few identifiable sex differences that have to do with reproduction in the brain. So no one can contest those differences. At the same time, trying to identify, for example, how hormones affect male and female psychological differences has been almost a hopeless task. When you go through the material, it is so contradictory that I would say the case is open. And the question I ask in The Summer Without Men repeatedly is, what is sameness and difference? And as the narrator, Mia, a woman, says at one point, it's not that there's no difference between women and men. It's how much difference that difference makes and how we choose to frame it.
Your heroine, Mia,
yes,
a poet, 55 years old,
yeah,
she learns at the beginning that her husband is going to leave her for the other woman,
yes, exactly,
much younger.
yes.
And so you took some, I think, very usual situation that
yes.
happens all the time,
yes.
all around the world.
Absolutely. Totally banal.
Yes.
It's the most banal story. And of course, if you think about it, there have been great works of art created from this narrative at the same time. So Anna Karenina is an adultery story. The Summer Without Men is an adultery story, but it's very banal, very ordinary. And so I wanted to take this completely ordinary, banal situation and deliver a comic rendition of it through the liveliness of the language, through the way it's told.
I have to go back to the beginning.
Yes.
Because you name her husband affair as a pose. Do you want the readers to forgive him?
Yes, in a way. I don't find this to be, in the realm of high crime, right? And so I do have sympathy for Boris, but I did very much want him to be outside the book. So the only active characters in the book are all female.
What is the sense of fidelity in marriage and in love?
Well, I think people make these things up as they go along to some degree, right? So the rules change. What the rules are now, I think is a little bit up in the air, but I think people make pacts. Some people live in relatively open situations and other people live in very closed ones. I think it's what is tolerable. Now, Mia is not a person who actually wants to be sharing her husband. She clearly is a person who wants him on her terms, which mean that he remains faithful to her. So I think that's part of the book, which is certainly implicit in the whole story. But I think this is what people can live with. So there are some people who seem to be able to transcend jealousy, sexual jealousy. And for many of us, I think that's really hard to do.
Is love something egoist?
In psychoanalysis, they talk about something called a narcissistic balance, which means that you need enough of a feeling of the other's attention, which makes you feel good about yourself, you know, that you have to have this inner sense of your own worth to go on in the world. You know, it can't be cracked and crushed. So that it involves certainly a kind of egoism. At the same time, I think real love involves empathy, you know, feeling for the other.
And when we love, do you know who we love or what we love?
It's a very old question, of course, and is also a lively debate in contemporary philosophy. There's always something that we cannot possess that remains elusive. In fact, one of the great errors, I think, in love is to assume that one knows everything about the other. We never do. And, you know, I've been married for a long time, 35 years. So I can say there are times when my husband surprises me with, say, a story I've never heard, and I surprise him in the same way. And it just is a reminder of the hidden depths of other people.
Your husband is Polom Osterom, writer. Mm-hmm. How is it to live with a writer?
Distinct advantage of living with a writer is, of course, that the writer knows what it's like to be a writer. There are good days and bad days, crises on the page, and Paul understands exactly what that means, just as I do. The other great advantage has been that we really are each other's editors. I read everything he writes and comment on it and mark it. And he does the same for me. Most of the time, there's very little to be said, to be perfectly honest. But there have been times over the last 30-something years that each of us has made some kind of significant criticism that the other person has then addressed and changed. So that's important, that's invaluable. I am going to build a house woman. She will have an inside and an outside so that we can walk in and out of her. I am drawing her, drawing and thinking about her form. She must be large, and she must be a difficult woman, but she cannot be a natural horror or a fantasy creature with a vagina dentata. She cannot be a Picasso or a de Kooning monster or Madonna. No either or for this woman. No, she must be true. She must have a head as important as her tail. And there will be characters inside that head, little men and women up to various pursuits. Let them write and sing and play instruments and dance and read very long speeches that put us all to sleep. Let her be my Lady Contemplation, in honor of Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle, the 17th century monstrosity, female intellectual.
Your main characters are often artists and writers and poets and painters. And in The Blazing World, your heroine is a painter, Harriet Burden. Who is she? Is she a real person or a character you made up?
No, I really made her up. And that book was generated, I think, out of creating this huge, almost mythical female character with a lot of power and vulnerability, and a lot of rage.
She's a painter and is disappointed by the reception
of her work. She feels denigrated, shoved to the side, and unrecognized. And so she decides to create a kind of experiment. and she shows her art behind what she calls masks. 3 actual living men who show the work for her, and then she studies the reception that those men get, which she didn't get. I did think of the book too. It's something that I'm very interested in. What is it? What does it mean to perceive a work of art? What does it mean to perceive other people? What plays crucial roles in perception? And I think we are all of us, I certainly don't exempt myself, vulnerable to ideas that are quite removed from the work of art itself. So my Harriet Burden is trying to expose this, to expose the vanity of the art world.
Yes, and you say that art made by men is
Yes.
much expensive than
It
art
is.
made by women.
It is. It is.
It is?
It is. The most money paid for a post-war, so let's just go after 1945, work of art is a Rothko, $80 million. And the last time I checked, I think this might have changed slightly, but the last time I checked, the most expensive work by a woman was a spider by Louise Bourgeois for $11 million. Now those are hugely different evaluations. Now I have to tell you, I would rather have the Louise Bourgeois than the Rothko. There's a whole system that reproduces itself, and devaluing works by women is certainly part of it. I mean, in The Summer Without Men, Mia talks about this too. In literature, you know, it's like, I don't read fiction, but my wife does. As if fiction, especially by women, is somehow...
Do you think there is difference between female and male writers?
I think that the value placed on it, I think that
yeah.
there's absolutely, I think there's a difference. Yeah. What Simone de Beauvoir wrote about in The Second Sex in 1949, I think still goes. The idea that maleness is universal and femaleness is not is something that is very stubborn in the culture, right? Think of just the idea of every man. The idea of every man is very different from the idea of every woman.
As Simone de Beauvoir, she said that one is not born as a woman,
one
but
becomes
a woman.
woman. Yeah.
Do you think?
I think to a
true?
large degree this is true. I mean, I think you can overstate this. You know, post-structuralism, like certain other ideas in the history of theory and philosophy, have ignored the body to a big extent. So I have a much more embodied point of view, and I think that aspects of bodily feminine reality are important and should not be suppressed. But at the same time, I don't think those bodily realities create any kind of necessary trajectory. So I would agree with Simone de Beauvoir that in many, many ways we do become women. We're not born that way. Every story we tell about ourselves can only be told in the past tense. It winds backwards from where we now stand, no longer actors in the story, but it's spectators who have chosen to speak. The trail behind us is sometimes marked by stones like the ones Hansel first left behind him. Other times the path is gone because the birds flew down and ate up all the crumbs at sunrise. Writing is a way to trace my hunger, and hunger is nothing if not a void.
You write a lot about the nature of writing, and I liked very much the conference you had, one story and not
Oh yeah, why
another.
one story, not another? Yeah.
And so you write a lot about the origins of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
I am trying to think about this. For example, the origins of narrative. I don't think that narrative is this externalized construct. Of course, to some degree it is. We've all read stories. It comes through language, speaking, learning to speak. But I have a feeling that the really deep roots of narrative are in very early life, and that they're dialogical, if you will. It starts in these early rhythms between an infant and a caretaker.
And where is that place inside of you where the story comes from?
The experience of finding a story or finding out what the story has to be, I think is strongly linked to a kind of memory. So it's as if the story is there before. And the task of the writer is to dig it up. Otherwise, how could you know what's right and wrong? You know, when you hit something that's right, and it's a, completely invented work of fiction, you still know what's right and what's wrong.
Do you know, and could you say, why do you write?
Yeah, I don't know probably all the reasons, but I have felt for a very long time, I've been writing, since I was a kid, that writing makes me feel intensely alive. Isn't that funny? You think it's like, living in this pretend world, or working on a paper about neurology or nerves or what have you. You'd think that you would be leaving the world. And in fact, my experience is that when I'm writing, I feel most deeply part of the world.